Welcome back to the Chasing Happiness podcast, an honest podcast about finding happiness, what it really means, and the process of getting there. My name is Crystal, and today I am joined by my beautiful friend, Tim, and we are going to talk about a number of different things because Tim is a podcaster with a wonderful podcast called Journey to Grateful, which we are totally going to dive into. But because I know Tim personally and have the pleasure of being able to call him a friend, I know we will also probably end up talking about family life, about Disney, and about all kinds of other things. So before we dive into everything, Tim, do you want to say hello to everybody?
Hello to everybody. How is everybody doing? I hope you're doing wonderful. I hope your day is great. And thank you so much for having me on. And it's so good to finally see you in person as much as we can be in person.
Yes. So Tim and I have the wonderful pleasure of having a group of family, I would almost call them, who we typically meet at least once a year, maybe sometimes twice a year, depending on circumstances.
Yep.
And COVID has kind of interrupted that. So I have not been able to see in person this wonderful group of people for a couple of years now. And it's absolutely killing me. As most people know who listen to this podcast, I go to Disney at least once a year. And that's where we all meet up. And, you know, we have a wonderful weekend of business stuff and Disney on the side, and it's just magical. And it has absolutely killed me to not be able to do it for the last couple of years. So I have my fingers crossed. I have already cleared out all of my weekends in 2022 to make sure that I can come. Hopefully the borders stay open and we are able to reconnect, but it is beautiful to see you as well. So thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, I so hope that you can come. That's going to be so wonderful. You know, I was at, unfortunately, the Momentum you were not at just last month in November, and it was like old home week. I knew maybe about half the people there. There was about half that were brand new. And of course, as you know, after 2 days, you leave with everybody as your best friend. And
Yes.
that is not an overstatement. That is not me just throwing out fluff. That is literally what happens. And this is from a workshop. This is what people would typically call a conference, which it isn't. It's an
Right.
unconference. It is nothing like anything you've ever experienced. And it's because of the people.
Yes.
And because Lou brings those types of people together, it's indescribable. So thank you so much.
It absolutely is indescribable. And, you know, I have spent the last 6 years or so of my life sort of creating the space around me and building my family, my chosen family, which happens to include you and Lou and our wonderful Momentum family. And it's because, you know, like-minded souls gravitate towards each other, and
absolutely,
we support each other in all of the craziness, in all of the chaos, and in all of the joy, right? So and that's ultimately one of the reasons both of us started our podcast, is because of these beautiful people around us. So do you want to talk a little bit about how that started for you?
Well, my podcast, Journey to Grateful, is really focused on trying to help people who are grieving loss of someone special. And it was unfortunately facilitated by the loss of my wife last year, July 3rd of 2020. But it really came about in two different ways. First of all, in a bereavement group that I had joined a few months after her passing, I had heard some stories in these groups, and I was shocked and I was just speechless about how sometimes somebody in somebody else's life could say the wrong thing, meaning well, but they would just say the wrong thing, or say something like, you know, isn't it about time that you're over this? And that just pains me so greatly. The idea that people don't understand the process of grief, and that grief seems to be a mysterious entity that for some reason most people are okay with allowing someone to go through all by themselves. And that's not right. And that is how I grew up. That is certainly something that I experienced as a kid. You know, there was the passing of someone. It was 1 or 2 weeks where you gathered with family, friends, meet third and fourth cousins, and you eat food and hang out until late at night. And then life got back to normal, and that was it. Meanwhile, you don't ever think about that person who is still waking up every morning without their loved one, going to bed every night without that loved one, and having to go through their everyday lives without that person. So that's why I created Journey to Grateful. The second reason why I created it was based on what my wife had done. She was diagnosed in early 2017 with breast cancer. And several months into her treatment, she came to me and kind of wondered aloud, I need to find out why this has happened to me. And I thought to myself, sweetie, you're not going to understand why you got this and why it's happening to you. And she said, no, you misunderstand me. I want to know what I can do with this. There must be a reason why I've been chosen to go through this. So she contacted her doctors, and through the first year of her treatment, she was able to counsel 2 or 3 different people that had just been diagnosed and that were anxious about what was lying ahead for them. So that was just amazing that she was able to do that. And she was able to just simply talk with them and explain to them what she had experienced and explain to them what might be on the horizon for them. And it gave them some comfort. So in a way, that's very much what I'm doing with Journey to Grateful. I am trying to show my life in the podcast. When I stumble, I express it in the podcast and explain it to people. When I have a story from somebody else, I want to share that with people. I have contributors on my website that write stories for the blog, and they're just sharing their experiences with their particular loss, because as you know, everybody's loss is absolutely different.
Yes. And I love this because you just shared this story with me, and I didn't know this story before. And the first thing that I thought when you shared it with me was, what a magical way to honor the beautiful soul that was your wife. Because a lot of people wouldn't be willing to talk aloud about what they were going through, let alone share it in the way that you're sharing it. And you took that moment of hers and just turned it into something that I think is such a beautiful lesson for people, because we can learn from each other's stories, which is the whole reason I have this podcast.
Yes.
We can learn by talking to people, and maybe what they're going through isn't exactly what we are, but there might be some nugget in there. There might be some piece of gold that we can take with us that helps us on our next part of our journey.
There's specifically the point that one thing, you might be sharing a story that has 10 or more items, 10 or more little things that seem to be important to you. If one gets through to somebody else and they can use that and work with that and run with that, that's gold. That is absolutely a perfect way to share your life and share something that is important to you, and then let that live on. Of course, with the podcast, it's a bit self-serving in a way for me. In a way, it is definitely therapy.
Sure.
I get to talk about what I'm going through, and I get to get it out. That does not mean that I don't see a counselor. I definitely do. And this woman is amazing. She doesn't let me get away with anything, very much like my wife, Colleen, and actually our daughter, Karen. So now I have 3 women in my life that don't let me get away with anything.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's really important. One of the things I try to remind people of on this podcast is everybody handles things differently. And for some people, therapy is the way to go. Some people, maybe it's coaching. Some people, maybe it's, a group session of some sort. Maybe
Absolutely.
For you, it's journaling. But whatever you're going through in life, the important thing is finding what works for you, what sticks in your life, and that you can move forward with.
Resources are extremely important, and to be presented with as many resources as possible is extremely beneficial for anybody who's going through grief. That does not mean that they need to take those resources and do something with them. If it's a book, if it's a podcast, if it is a group, whatever works for them, make sure if you're trying to support somebody who has experienced loss, make sure that you don't shy away with sharing with that person a resource and explain to them, I found this, I thought of you, I think that it would help, but if it's not for you, or if it's not for you right now, that's absolutely fine. But express your need to help them by providing them with some resources, and then just let it go and say, okay, here's that resource. It's up to you if you'd like to or not. It might not be a good fit, and that is absolutely fine. But sometimes we don't know the resources that are out there until somebody tells us about them.
Yes.
If it wasn't for Lou, and if it wasn't for Momentum 19, I would have never met you. And I would not have met dozens of people that I definitely call friends. And let me tell you, you as well as all of those people, even from far away, you have supported me through what I have gone through since 2017, like you would not believe. And it has been absolutely priceless. And if anybody says that, friendships on Facebook, where you are really literally connecting on Facebook once in person once a year, and otherwise you're on Facebook or Instagram or emails or
Wherever.
Zooms, perhaps. If anybody says that that's not valuable, I'd like to have a conversation with them, because it is priceless. You cannot have too much support. You cannot have too many people in your life to get through something like that.
That's huge. And I think it's really important for people to remember that, because people who support you don't have to be the people who are in your everyday life. They don't have to be the
Absolutely
people
not.
knocking on your front door. They can be, but
They
they can
can be,
also be
definitely.
people that just occasionally come into contact with, or maybe they are just people who are online. And if it gives you a sense of comfort, if it gives you a sense of awareness of knowing that there's someone you can reach out to regardless of circumstance, then it shouldn't matter where they're from. Just keep them in your life in some way.
Absolutely. Everybody has a reason why they're in your life, and they fill a certain niche in your life. And you don't just simply brush that off because they are not in your backyard. I actually see that our lives as my family, we have family and friends, and then there are concentric circles around us at all times, and there are different levels. And it doesn't matter what level that you're on in those circles, you are playing a part, and you are in a very important role. And it might be for a small period of time, it might be on very rare occasions, but it is priceless. I have high school friends. In fact, I'm going to meet them for lunch, I think, in 2 days. One
Oh,
is lives in Arizona, comes up twice a year, and every time she comes up, she contacts us, and we all gather for lunch or whatever. It's two friends I get together with. I might see one twice a year at the most, but that's valuable, and that is absolutely priceless. So don't give up on anybody who is offering you support. You never know when that support is going to be just absolutely priceless. And I would argue that it's priceless at all times.
I love that. I love that because I think often, especially in this weird and crazy social media world we live in, we think our lives have to look a specific way, and we think we have to meet other people's expectations of what that should be.
Correct.
And it's a great reminder that I have these people around me, and maybe I only see them once a year, but my neighbor sees their friends every day. It's okay if your life looks different than someone else's.
Yes, absolutely. And everybody's life is always going to look different than somebody else's in one aspect or many aspects. And that doesn't mean that your life is better or worse than anybody else's. And honestly, you bring up social media, and it's been a wonderful thing and it's been a terrible thing. It's
Mhm.
a wonderful thing because it does allow us to meet up with people that we otherwise couldn't. It keeps us in touch with people who we otherwise would not be able to keep in touch with as often. And that's absolutely priceless. But it's also a detriment because, everybody has those, hey, I'm only going to post the perfect pictures. I'm only going to
Right.
post the perfect life. And life is not perfect. We are living an imperfect life every single day. Everybody is, whether they want to admit it or not. And why
Right.
is that such a bad thing? That is not a bad thing. My house is known as the word house. We have a lot of plaques, a lot of things hanging on our walls that have special meaning or have some sort of a phrase. And one of them mentions something about, sorry you're here today, but I cleaned the house yesterday. And it's like, yes, definitely. Yes, we clean up for parties, we clean up for special gatherings. But if you stop over during the week unannounced, you're not going to find a pigsty, but you're going to find that people live here. And you're going to find, when my kids were younger, that kids play and leave out their toys. And
Mm,
that's called life. And
right.
that is the honest life. That is not the picture perfect life. There might be stuff out on our counters that during parties might not be out on the counter if we are cleaning up and putting on the special airs for somebody. And that's absolutely fine. That is life. That is being human. That is being, I suppose the word authentic would go into play here. And I like that. I like that a lot. That was one wonderful thing about my wife Colleen and I is we got each other. We understood each other. We weren't over the top one way or the other when it came to little simple things in life. But one thing that we did agree upon was family and friends were huge and very important. And she built the most wonderful family and friend base that you would ever imagine. And we lived it and we benefited from it. And honestly, I'm still benefiting from it. And that's because we are just honest people. We just live our lives and we help when we can. And then we say thank you when other people help.
Which I think is magical because we often do forget as human beings that sometimes not everybody can help, but those who can and who mean something and who care about you, they're going to step up when they can in whatever way they can. And you shared a beautiful story with me earlier because people who are listening to this podcast, Tim and I recorded for his podcast earlier today, and you shared this beautiful story about somebody who really wasn't much of a cook and could only bake a little bit. But during your time of grief, they wanted to help and they didn't know how to show up. And so they brought you a Starbucks every once in a while, which for people listening might sound really small, but in the midst of your chaos, in the midst of what you were going through in the process of losing your wife while she was sick, before you lost her, all of that, having one moment of kindness, even if it is as simple as a cup of coffee, can change your whole outlook.
Absolutely. I've mentioned many times it doesn't take very much. It just takes a simple hello, a simple reach. Yeah, we had another friend of ours after my wife was diagnosed the second time with the brain tumors. She came over, had a huge box filled with paper bags. Inside the paper bags were snacks, the little goldfish snacks and little pretzel snacks and whatever. And I looked at her and I said, "What's this?" And she said, "Well, you have to make lunches for the boys. I figured I'd take one thing off your plate." And she had I think she had a whole month worth of snacks already paper bagged up and everything. And it was the sweetest darn thing because not only was it thoughtful, but it was spot on. It filled a need that I didn't realize that I had, but it made life a little bit easier for that small period of time. I think the most unique giving of yourself can mean the absolute most in somebody's life. And then they can pay forward that little effort that you did when they find themselves in the position to do so themselves. And hopefully they're going to pay it forward in just as special and unique a way as possible. We experience things like that all the time. And I love people who are honest and who are real. We had another friend who had experienced different illnesses with her children, and she contacted me via text and she said, "Okay, I'm on your meal train for tomorrow night. What do you want? Let me explain to you. I don't cook. I will go pick something up. If you tell me to pick something up, I will pick up only the things that you tell me. I will not add another thing to your order. When I arrive at your door, I will say hello. I will give you the bag and I will leave because you have enough to deal with." And she is so wonderful. So, of course, I dragged her inside and we chatted for a little bit. But that whole idea of I want to help, but I don't want to be intrusive to what you have going on around you is priceless, because those are the people who get it. Those are the people who show up when they need to show up. They help, they walk away, and they're not looking for anything.
Right.
They're not looking for a grand thank you. They are just saying, here you go. And then when you can do the same for somebody else, do the same. And those are the best people that you have in your life.
Agreed. And those are the people you want in your life, because it really, people talk, especially at this time of year, a lot about reciprocity, giving something to get something. And ultimately, I think the goal really should be just to give. give kindness, give love, give whatever you are capable of giving with no expectation of anything in return, because I promise you, you will get lots of things in return if you just show up without the expectation.
Yeah, I completely agree. You don't have to do much, and you don't have to, I suppose you don't have to be looking for the spotlight to be on you. You don't have to be looking for anything but somebody getting a smile on their face because of what you just did. I mean, that is simply enough. Unfortunately, I have a good friend 2 doors up who just lost his wife a little over a month ago. And I've reached out to him, and I want to give him his space, but I also want to make sure that he understands that, we're here. And the reason why I'm doing that is because that's exactly what he and his wife and his family have done for us over the course of the last several years. They would just simply come over, drop off something, say hi, and remind us that they're there. Oftentimes people will ask, what can we do for you? When what tends to be a little bit more beneficial for that person is to just choose to do something specific, to take that off of their plate, to have to decide what you can do for them.
Right.
That also can go a long way. Like I said, with the friend who brought the snacks, she came up with that idea herself, and she just delivered it. She didn't say, hey, what can I do? And then the open-ended question is there. I have to come up with an answer.
Right.
9 times out of 10, what are we going to do? We're not going to come up with anything.
Exactly.
So oftentimes it's just best to say, okay, I've dropped off an envelope with 10 gift cards in it in your mailbox. Go ahead and grab that. And that's enough, because it doesn't have to be another thing that they are going to have to decide and to provide you with what you can do for them. Just do something for them. Do one thing for them that perhaps is an everyday thing. Take that item off of their plate to do, and then you could be that friend that they talk about on a podcast.
Well, and do the thing that realistically they might not even be thinking of. So, the woman who brought you the lunches, most people, especially in the midst of dealing with a sick spouse or grieving through a grieving process, people aren't thinking like, oh, well, I need to do laundry. I need to make lunch. I need to do the normal everyday things.
You're not thinking about it until all of a sudden you remember.
Exactly. So just
socks. You need
right.
Hold on a second.
Exactly. So taking a little initiative. And I know a lot of people, because I've been through a lot of loss in my life, a lot of people will say to me, well, I don't want to do something someone else is doing, but here's the rub. It's okay if someone else is doing it too, because you can never
Definitely
offer too much help. If someone shows up at my door and I'm in the middle of a grieving process, I'm not going to tell them, well, someone already brought me the lunches for the kids. I don't need them, right? Exactly. Like, you're not going to do that. So just show
not
up.
At all. You're going to say thank you, and you will deal with it. Absolutely. Can't tell you how many times we had 2 or 3 pans of lasagna in the freezer. And that was fine. That was absolutely fine. Did they go to waste? No. Were they used? Yes. Were they used right away? No. But it doesn't have to be very much. It just has to be you reaching out, you showing up, and you being a good friend. That's all. And that goes so far. I can't even... Well, I'm trying to explain it, but I really feel like I can't explain it.
I think you're actually doing a great job explaining it, especially on your podcast, because I think there's a lot of things people don't necessarily think about. And as you mentioned at the beginning, sometimes, especially if people have never been through a grief process, if they've never lost somebody close to them, they really don't necessarily know how to handle the situation. And even if they mean well, it can be very inappropriate in certain moments how they approach it. So giving people the ability to open a dialogue and have a conversation the way you are with your podcast, I think is beautiful, because I think people, regardless of whether they're in a grieving process or they know someone who is, at some point, there's going to be something they can take from that and utilize at a different point in their life. And that is the magical part.
Thank you. That's actually one very important aspect of Journey to Grateful podcast is it's not just for somebody who has lost someone. It is for everybody who is also trying to support someone who has lost somebody.
Yes.
It is important for everybody, I think, to understand what the grieving process is from the people who are going through their particular journey. That's why the people, the family, the friends that I have who I've asked to write their story, their experiences, and share them on the blog. That's why those are so important. Not every story that's on the blog is going to make sense or speak to somebody.
Sure.
But if there's one story that really touches somebody, that is going to mean absolutely everything to that particular person. So you don't have to have lost a son. You do not have had to have lost your parent to understand what that might feel like. And then if you run across a friend who is now dealing with loss, you're oftentimes going to be wondering, what is it that I can possibly do? How can I be of help? And even just talking about it on your podcast here, sharing the experiences that I've had perhaps puts a little seed in somebody's mind and gives them some ideas on how they can help. But everybody is going to be touched by grief in one way or the other. And as we've mentioned before, even when we recorded for my podcast, we talked about loss is loss, and it doesn't necessarily have to literally be the grieving of a lost person in your life. It could simply be a loss of a job, a loss of an opportunity. There are different types of losses. And many times the inspirational quotes that I will put up on Instagram, they don't necessarily speak to just the people who have lost a person. They can be about something that you've lost in your life. So it's quite amazing how much this grief and loss aspect really kind of intertwines with life, no matter what your experience has been. And you never know when you're going to get and where you're going to find inspiration.
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm consistently sharing the things that you share on Instagram because I think they're valuable to everyone, regardless of circumstance, as you said.
Yes, thank you.
And it's just, sometimes we need the reminder. Sometimes we need a reminder of someone saying it's okay to be human today. It's okay to fall down. It's okay to not feel okay, regardless of what you're grieving, whether it's someone or some experience or some other aspect of life. Not every day is cupcakes and sprinkles as much as, people like me would love for it to be. Lots of days are not. And lots of days are, days where I would rather be in pajamas than get dressed or whatever the circumstances
and
are.
Watch something and just veg. Yes, absolutely. But you can't live your life that way, right? And but we have to allow ourselves that occasionally. You have to allow yourself that deep, dark, extra thick chocolate gooey brownie on occasion. It's always in moderation. That's okay. And, people coming through the last 18, 24 months with the pandemic, there has been plenty of loss. And there has been plenty of loss of friendships and plenty of loss of life and plenty of loss of freedom. All of those connect very well with so much of what you talk about on Chasing Happiness. And ultimately, everybody at some point in their life, actually it should be every single day of their life, we are chasing happiness. I'm chasing happiness. I'm trying to reinvent what our life now is. Keep in mind that when you lose somebody, especially a spouse, you lose the future. You lose everything that you guys have ever talked about or planned out in advance. If you lose a friend, you lose someone who was going to grow old with you. You lose everything that you hoped to do with that particular friend. But the one thing that you haven't lost is you haven't lost the memories and you haven't lost the history with that person. And although in the pandemic, we have lost so much with all the restrictions, we haven't lost the ability to reach out and help people. We haven't lost the ability to be a friend to somebody. We've lost the ability or the way that we do that.
Sure.
Thank you, Zoom. But we have not lost the ability to be that friend for that person. And we need to make sure that we realize that we have to, yes, grieve for the things that we've lost, but let's celebrate what we had. I think Dr. Seuss has a saying that says something to the effect of, don't be sad that it's over, be happy that it happened. And that alone is absolutely priceless. We would say that oftentimes with the kids growing up because they would be disappointed. We were leaving Disney, bringing in the Disney thing, and we would bring that one up. Don't be sad that it's over. Be happy that it happened.
Right.
Let's be thankful that we have had what we have had.
Absolutely. And, you don't have to be thankful in every single moment of every single day. You can absolutely be sad about the experience, but also remind yourself, it could have been different. And so I have to appreciate what I did have. And especially when we're talking about a grieving process, you're not going to get there right away. It's going to take time. And you have to allow the time for that. But remembering when you're capable and you're in the place to remember, to be grateful, is so important because mindset plays such a big role in processing grief.
That's a really good point. When you are in the place where you can actually be thankful, that's when you need to be thankful. Because yes, you are going to have those times, many times, where you just say, this sucks. This really sucks. You can be mad, you can be angry, you can be frustrated, you're going to have anxiety. It's going to be terrible. But there are going to be times when you might be able to finally step back and you might be able to see the good. And they might be little bitty nuggets. They might be giant pieces. You never know. But we need to be able to live that life with its ups and downs and to find a way to be grateful for what we've had. The name Journey to Grateful was not an accident. I went through many different titles, and actually the Grateful came from a pillow that my wife had gotten after she was diagnosed, and it's on our bed, and it still is on our bed, and it just simply says Grateful. And she said that she needed to have that so that she could be reminded of the things to be grateful for when she was going through all her treatments. And I thought that was absolutely wonderful. And of course, that's not where I went first when I was naming the podcast. It was, now it seems like it was just the obvious choice, but that's not where I went. And I wrote down so many different things. And then at the end of the day, I'm tired and I'm like, can't believe I'm going, the beginning of the day and the end of the day after you lose somebody are the two hardest points in the day to have to live through. So I go up to my room and I'm just sitting there deciding if I just want to crawl into bed or if I want to read a book. I don't want the day to end because of so many different reasons. And I look over and there's the pillow that I put on the bed every day when I make the bed, and it said Grateful. And I'm just kind of thinking to myself, okay, are you telling me something? And sure enough, I think that my wife actually helped me not only create the podcast, but to name the podcast. And it is all about trying to find your nuggets of grateful. And it's all about this journey that we go through that has its ups and downs. It's not a journey that I think will ever end. We spoke about this earlier, that this is not something that you get over. This is something that you walk through. This is something that you walk forward into. And every step of the way, you're just simply trying to move forward. And that's all. You're keeping the grief with you. You're keeping that loss with you. And that will be with you forever. And you're just trying to make one more.
So for people listening to the podcast, I have lost Tim temporarily because of the technical difficulties here, but I am trying to get him back.
What did you do?
And we're back. This is the one downside for everybody who is listening to the podcast. Tim and I had a technical difficulty. I lost him temporarily. He is now back. But this is the downside to this crazy digital world that we live in is sometimes things happen and you kind of have to go with the flow. And I actually think that kind of perfectly fits with what you were talking about, because sometimes you just have to do what you can do in the moment. And that's all you can do.
Absolutely. Hey, remember when we talked about life is messy? and it's not always perfect. Welcome to Not Always Perfect.
Exactly. I'm glad I got you back because I do want to, and of course, for everyone listening, I will post in the show notes all of the links to Tim's podcast, to the website, all of that fun stuff. But I do want to ask you, so typically at the end of the podcast for the last little while, I have asked people 4 questions, and I got away from that for about a month or so. And the community of Chasing Happiness was very adamant that I needed to bring that back. But I think
I'm reading your community notes and they say no. They say, do not ever ask those 4 questions again.
I adore you. Honestly, out of the 4 questions, I think there's really only one that I want to ask you. And the reason I want to ask it to you is I think what your answer is today will be different than the next time I see you. It'll be different than, the next time we have a conversation. And the question really is just, in this moment, how would you define happiness?
Oh, very good. Not sure if it's going to change if I answer it this way, but in my heart, this is what happiness is. And happiness is family. And I'm going to say family and I'm not going to say friends, because when I say family, I'm not just talking about blood family. I'm talking about that family that you let in your life so they can be friends. And I have a huge family. I'm not going to discern and detail the difference between the people who are my cousins or my aunts or my brothers and my sisters from my friends and so on. Because if you're part of my family, if you've helped me, if you have touched my life, you are family, whether you have the same last name as me or not. And I think that is the ultimate happiness in life. I think the value of family is fleeting at times, and it tends to really shine the brightest when you need it the most. And I have to tell you something that my oldest son shared with me yesterday. He has this paper that he had to write, and it's called I Believe. And he was writing it, and he came over to me as I was just on the couch, kind of winding down. And he had the saddest look on his face, and he just buried his head in my shoulder. And I was like, buddy, what's wrong? And he went on to explain to me that there's so much in life that he didn't realize was so important until it's gone right now. And of course, he was talking about his mom, and he was talking about things that we've done over time. And, we had a long conversation, and he gets it. And I explained to him that I completely agree. There are so many details of life that whether or not we appreciate them fully when we're going through it, when they are no longer here, that is when we appreciate it the most. And he truly got that. And in our conversation, we talked about family and friends. And I told him, I said, oftentimes there is a gray area between that definition of family and friends.
Right.
And I said, I always hope that you have a lot of people in that gray area for yourself. And he kind of looked at me and said, well, what do you mean? And I said, I want you to always have a large group of friends that you can easily call family, because that is always going to be the most important. I said, look what we have created. Look what mom has created in her life. If we didn't have what she created, we would not have had all the support that we've had. And he kind of looked at me and said, yeah, that's important.
That's so beautiful. Oh my God, you're bringing tears to my eyes. I think everyone listening to this podcast can relate to that in some way, right? And just the sort of realization of that, and to be able to share a moment like that with your kid, like, oh.
Well, and keep in mind, he's a freshman in high school. That's the type of age where you're really getting a little worried about how far away they're going to start going away from you. And one thing that has impressed me for the last 2 years, ever since we lost my wife, I have chosen to be able to take my kids to school and bring them home. I don't want them to take the bus, because if I can trap them in the car, we can get in some conversations. And it's worked occasionally. I don't push too many things, but on occasion, we get some really good conversations. And that's just been a very priceless aspect. But the one thing that has surprised me the most is that every single time I drop my high schooler off, he says, I love you. And
Aw.
that means more to me than anything. Because if you can have somebody that's that age
Yeah.
and they're willing to say, I love you, and they're not afraid to say that,
Yes.
I blame my wife for that because she's definitely the catalyst that made that happen.
Oh, I love that. And people can't see this because obviously they're not watching the video, but we're both like teary-eyed because
We
it is
definitely are.
such a beautiful thing. And to be able to be open enough to share something like that with the world, I think is just part of your magic. And I cannot thank you enough for joining me today. You are by
Thank
far one of the people in my circle of family that I am so unbelievably grateful to be able to call a friend and a family member and someone who is just here. Like I cannot wait to see you in person again.
Big ol' hug. And it's going to
Exactly.
last a long time.
It's going to be one of those weird, awkward hugs that I keep
Oh,
telling
yes,
people
it
about,
is.
and I'm totally
I'm
okay
going to
with
be
it.
pushing other people away. Nope, we're not done yet. Keep going.
Exactly. Oh, I adore you. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining me
you.
today.
Well, I love being here. I really appreciate you sharing with me your podcast and being willing to be on mine. So forever, friends.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, again, I will post in the show notes all of the fun stuff so that you can follow Tim and the podcast and the journey. And I thank you guys for coming back week after week, because as this podcast has evolved over the last 6 years, things have changed and I've changed and you keep coming back. And I am forever grateful every week when I see that one person has downloaded. And of course, more than one person does. And I just don't know what to do with that. And I'm grateful for it. So thank you. Have a wonderful week, everyone. And we will chat with you next week.